Mom sided with stepdad and his kids, kicked me out, but they forgot that I own the house. Now it's time to take it back. It never occurred to me, 35M, that my father's meticulous estate planning would ultimately cause our family to fall apart. There's a lot to digest here, and I want to make sure I'm giving you the whole picture. So, let me start at the beginning. One of the big tech businesses in Seattle employs me as a senior software architect. My dad always had this kind of job in mind for me. Technology is the future, he would exclaim proudly after I was accepted to UW's computer science program. He had a profitable construction business and wasn't a techie, but he had a remarkable knack for predicting trends. Beginning with the recession of the late 1980s, Dad started his construction business from the ground up. Throughout some of the most difficult periods in the industry, he took on projects that other contractors wouldn't take on, using only a pickup truck and his tools back then. Mom told me they lived in a small apartment and were frugal, but Dad had this unwavering faith in his vision. He would frequently remark, "The key is to build relationships, not just buildings." That way of thinking got him through his difficult early years. Dad's business was unique because of the way he treated both customers and staff. Even if it meant losing some bids to rivals who made exaggerated deadline promises, he was a firm believer in open pricing and truthful schedules. First establish trust, he would advise. He was correct when he said, "The profits will follow his business," which was renowned for taking on intricate restoration projects requiring both technical expertise and historical sensitivity. Rose to prominence in the Seattle area by the mid-1990s because of the devotion he had developed with his clients and staff. Dad's business survived the 2008 financial crisis when many construction companies were failing. He didn't fire a single employee during that period. Rather, he reduced his personal income to zero and took out a second mortgage on his cherished Mustang. I learned more about leadership from watching him handle that issue than I could have from any management course. "Your employees are your extended family," he told me. "You take care of them. They'll take care of your business." I didn't realize at the time how much his managerial approach affected my own career. Many of his ideas were put to use when I was promoted to team lead at my software business. I established thorough documentation procedures for our code, much as he had kept thorough project logs for every building site. I was able to lead my development team through challenging project deadlines thanks to his attention on fostering good relationships. I met Emily, 34F, at a hackathon in my junior year. She assisted in planning the event while pursuing her studies in business administration. Despite my lack of sleep, energy drink addiction, and likely messy appearance, she somehow found my love of code charming. From the first time he laid eyes on her, Dad fell in love. He told me, "She grounds you," following their first meal together. Don't let this one get away. After college, Dad even assisted Emily in launching her own marketing firm. He introduced her to his network of local company owners, showed her how he drafted his contracts, and shared his business objectives with her. He would tell us, "Success isn't just about what you know. It's about helping others succeed too." Dad was always imparting his expertise in educating. Those formative years were unique. Emily and I would always make the drive to my parents' house on Sundays to have dinner. We would all sit on the back deck that Dad had constructed and chat about everything and nothing while he lit the grill. Even though he couldn't understand the majority of the technical details of my most recent work, he would still ask in-depth inquiries. Mom used to say, "There they go again with the computer talk." With a loving eye roll, Dad's pride and joy was the house itself. He purchased it with the proceeds from his first significant construction job in the 1990s, which was a historic restoration project that made his business famous in one of Seattle's older neighborhoods. This lovely craftsman-style home features a wraparound porch and a garage that he transformed into the most well-organized workshop you've ever seen. Labeled and placed with almost fanatical precision, each tool has its place. Dad handled the house as though it were a living example of his skill. Every renovation was meticulously organized and recorded. Every repair, improvement, and paint job was documented in a thorough spreadsheet that he maintained. A house is like a living thing, he would say as he demonstrated for me how to clean the gutters or inspect the foundation. He maintained a maintenance regimen that included everything from checking the roof after winter storms to changing air filters. Neglect the little things, and they become big problems. In addition to being his haven, the workshop served as a classroom where he taught me about subjects other than tools. In addition to adding unique storage options and a workbench he made especially for teaching me woodworking, he had completely renovated the garage himself. Every piece of wood has its own story, he would say as we were working. The pegboard wall, with delineated shapes for each tool, wasn't just about organization. It was his method of teaching me that everything has a place and a purpose. Our job is to help tell that story. Our family held weekends in high regard. In that garage, Dad and I would work on his 1967 Mustang for hours on end. When I was 12, Dad had purchased it for restoration, claiming it would be a project that would strengthen our bond as father and son. That vehicle turned into a life lessons classroom. His advice, which I still abide by now, was straightforward. Always use the right tool for the job, or shortcuts look tempting, but they'll cost you in the long run. Although Dad might have completed the Mustang project in 1 year if he had so desired, it took 3 years. However, he was more interested in the process than the final destination. I learned everything from project management to fundamental mechanics from him. We took pictures of every component we changed, recorded each step, and maintained thorough logs of our development. This isn't just about fixing a car, he would affirm. It's about learning how to break down big problems into manageable pieces. I found that lesson to be really helpful in my profession as a software developer. Emily and I purchased a small home around 20 minutes from my parents' house after we were married. Although Dad insisted that we take out the mortgage in our names, Dad assisted us with the down payment. You need to build your own credit history, he clarified. It's about standing on your own feet. He taught me how to install ceiling fans and fix drywall as he worked on our renovations on the weekends. He was preparing me for the responsibilities of home ownership even back then. At this time, my career was really taking off. I had just received a promotion to team lead, overseeing a team that was creating infrastructure solutions. I enjoyed every second of it, even if the hours were long and the strain was great. During my lunch breaks, Dad would frequently call to check in without discussing anything specific. He was aware of the demands of managing a group and overseeing the work of others. Remember to delegate, he would say. You can't do everything yourself, just like I can't build a house alone. When Dad initially started feeling exhausted all the time, we were discussing the possibility of starting a family. He continued to put off seeing a doctor despite Mom's insistence. Just working too hard, he would dismiss our worries. He was working on his largest project to date, a multi-million-dollar development deal that would have established his business for the ensuing 10 years. In retrospect, I regret not pressing harder and insisting on those examinations sooner. Perhaps things might have turned out differently. At the time, the business was expanding quickly. Dad was discussing growing into historical restoration projects in the Pacific Northwest and had recently launched a second office in Portland. He had established a reputation for updating the infrastructure of historic structures without sacrificing their character. He would tell his clients, "It's about embracing the future while respecting the past." Everything he accomplished, including his personal and professional life, was impacted by his love of preservation. The Mustang was the subject of our last meaningful discussion. He was discussing taking it to car shows now that we had completed the restoration, when he remarked, "We should sign up for the Pacific Northwest Classic." His eyes glowed like a child. He continued to plan for the future until the very end, saying, "Show these youngsters what a real muscle car looks like." It began like any other morning until everything changed. When Mom called, my phone buzzed while I was in an early meeting. We were in the midst of an important project conversation, so I nearly didn't respond. But I had to go out and take it for some reason. Mom was crying so hard she was having trouble speaking. Dad had passed out on a construction site. He had left by the time I arrived at the hospital. According to the physicians, it was a sudden and severe heart attack. He was only 58. The weeks following Dad's passing were a haze of mourning and bureaucracy. The funeral was crowded. Dad's business and community involvement had impacted countless people. Suppliers, contractors, and even rival businesses came to show their support. Everybody shared a story about how Dad had supported them, given them advice, or simply been there for them when they needed someone to confide in. One old craftsman told me how, despite being unable to work during a protracted illness, Dad had managed to keep him on the payroll. "Your father understood that business was about people first," he stated. The workers of the company were heartbroken. Many of them had known Dad for decades, and they told me things I had never heard before, like how he had paid for the college textbooks of one foreman's daughter, assisted another through a divorce, or remained late to teach apprentices the nuances of historical restoration. With pictures and handwritten remarks from both clients and employees, the workplace conference room was transformed into an unofficial monument. We were all surprised by how well Dad had prepared for everything. His attorney, Mr. Anderson, summoned us in for a meeting a week following the funeral. He took out this enormous accordion file that read family security protocol and was neatly handwritten by Dad. Dozens of carefully arranged papers with comprehensive instructions for various areas of his land were found within. I was given a 3-day tour of Dad's estate paperwork by Mr. Anderson. Each color-coded container had personal notes outlining his decisions in addition to legal paperwork. I've never seen an estate plan this thoroughly in my 35 years of practice, Mr. Anderson remarked. Dad had even included a 5-year business transition plan with backup plans for various circumstances. After that, Mom began going to her church's bereavement support group. She first met Steve, 58 meters, there. Initially, she only mentioned him in passing. Steve suggested this great book about healing, or, Steve said it's normal to feel this way. He was one of the group facilitators and had lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier. Even if it seemed a little early, I was happy that she was receiving support. I was reminded by Emily that everyone experiences grief in a unique way. Every Tuesday night, the church grief support group met. Before long, Mom was attending church functions with Steve more often. After services, coffee gatherings became lunch meetings, which in turn became dinner dates. Our family friends began to worry about how quickly their friendship was developing. At a family get-together, my Aunt Jane pulled me aside because she was concerned that Mom was hurrying into things to make up for Dad's absence. Mom's changes became more apparent. Her haircut changed. She started dressing differently, and she even threw out the garden that Dad had helped her create. Every time I questioned these changes, she would respond, "It's time for a fresh start." Dad was hardly ever mentioned by the woman who used to spend hours narrating her life with him. It went more quickly than any of us had anticipated. Mom announced that Steve was moving in 6 months after Dad's death. James, 30 meters, and Lisa, 3 to F, his own grown children, felt it would be beneficial to bring life back into the house. I made an effort to be sympathetic, but it seemed like she was in a rush to replace everything Dad had constructed. I'm at a crossroads right now. How can I preserve Dad's legacy without jeopardizing Mom's chances for happiness? Emily advises me to strike a balance, but I can't help but think of Dad's letter. "Son, preserve those memories first. Update. I apologize for the wait for the update and appreciate all of the advice you gave on my previous article. 3 months have passed since my last post, and things have become much worse. Steve's domineering demeanor used to bother me, but now he acts as though he owns the house my dad left me. Steve made the decision to begin a significant restoration project last month without even asking my permission. The built-in bookshelves my dad had made for the living room were being torn up by contractors when I visited one weekend, as if he owned the building. Steve was watching over them and directing them to just throw all this old wood in the dumpster. These were the final project Dad and I worked on together before he became ill, so they were more than just shelves. He responded angrily when I approached him. He said, "Look, son," with a condescending emphasis on the pronoun. "This house needs to be brought into the 21st century. Your father's taste was well dated. We're doing you a favor by increasing the property value." I reminded him that any modifications required my consent legally. Mom obviously agreed with him, but he simply chuckled and added, "Your mother and I live here. We don't need permission to improve our home." "Steve knows about these things," she acknowledged. "He's just trying to help." The woman who formerly loved those bookshelves and used to place her collection of antique teacups on them for Christmas now acts as though they were just taking up room. I showed her Dad's thorough house maintenance plans, but she disregarded them as dwelling in the past. Additionally, the relationship with Steve's children has deteriorated. James has taken over Dad's workshop and transformed it into a CrossFit facility. While I was on a business trip, he held a garage sale and sold the majority of Dad's tools. By repainting rooms and installing modern vinyl planks in place of Dad's meticulously refinished hardwood floors, Lisa is treating the space as though it were her own personal design project. One evening after dinner, Steve grabbed me aside and said, "Since we're paying to live here, we should have our names on the deed. It's only fair." I had to explain to him that they don't pay a mortgage because Dad's planning has paid for the house in full. They don't even cover their rent. All maintenance expenses, insurance, and property taxes are paid for by me. Emily recommended that we stop making weekly visits now that Emma is here. She is correct. No one benefits from the stress in that household. However, taking a back seat has only made Steve more confident. He began sending me bills for improvements that I never approved, and he began making them more regularly. I should be more sympathetic to Mom's new life, according to Mom's sister, who called me recently. I attempted to explain Dad's intentions and my legal obligations, but she simply accused me of being trapped in the past. "Steve makes her happy. Why can't you just let them make the house their own?" she asked. I found out this week that the growth markers that recorded my height from the ages of 3 to 18 had been removed from the kitchen door frame. Every birthday, Dad would measure me and write the date next to each mark. It's just an old door frame. "We can't keep every piece of wood just because your father touched it," Mom remarked when I confronted her about it. I now spend more time sitting in Dad's old chair, the only piece of furniture I was able to keep in my own garage. Mr. Anderson advises me to begin considering long-term fixes. Legally, the house belongs to me, but I will eventually have to make some difficult choices regarding its destiny. When does being the bad guy become more important than preserving your father's legacy? And when your whole family opposes you, how do you defend the moral high ground? Update 2. I appreciate all of your advice regarding my previous post. The situation has reached a breaking point, and I finally made a choice that will most likely alter everything. I spoke with my financial advisor about the house situation last week. We may make a sizable rental income, enough to cover Emma's future college fund, because nearby property values have risen by 40% in the last 3 years. I discovered at the discussion that I had been so preoccupied with the sentimental elements that I had failed to take into account the financial ramifications of allowing Mom and Steve to live rent-free. Everything went haywire when I brought this up to Mom in our weekly conversation. She yelled into the phone, "You can't do this to us. This is where we call home. Steve has worked really hard on it." She refused to listen when I tried to explain that I was only considering my choices. She continued to talk about all the enhancements they had made, utterly disregarding the fact that I had never given my approval for these changes. An hour later, Steve called. He was upset, and his tone was different from his usual arrogant demeanor. "Listen here," he announced. "In this house, we have established a life. Because you're missing your father, you can't just walk in and ruin everything." He interrupted me when I attempted to explain the financial issues. stating that they now had sweat equity in the property. I reminded him that the house belonged to me legally. There's a reason why Dad left it to me, I said. Your father isn't here anymore, he replied. You must consider the living. I talked to Emily about it and consulted Mr. Anderson before deciding. The following day, when I arrived at the house, Mom and Steve were working on yet another remodeling job in the dining room. They had begun ripping out the original crown molding, which Dad had specifically milled to blend in with the house's antique style. That image made me more determined. They have 2 weeks to find another place to live, I told them. Mom burst into tears at once, accusing me of being callous and harsh. Steve tried to scare me by arguing with me about my inability to throw them out on the street. He began enumerating all of their local ties, including his place of employment, their church, and their neighborhood pals. When faced with challenging circumstances, I maintained my composure and firmness. As my father had taught me, I declared, "This is my property. Dad left it to me for a reason, and I'm exercising my legal right as the owner." Steve's cheeks flushed, and he began to enumerate all the money they had spent on upgrades. I informed him that the historical value of the property had actually been diminished by these unapproved alterations. When Lisa returned home and joined the debate, things became worse. Mom utilized her pregnancy as emotional leverage right away. How are you able to treat your stepsister in this way? She will give birth to a child. Although Lisa's pregnancy is significant to them, I had to tell them that it does not affect my property rights and that she is not my stepsister. There has been an ongoing assault of emotional manipulation ever since. Mom's whole family has banded together to oppose me. Her sister called, sobbing, and said their parents wanted to make sure Mom was safe. Messages regarding the challenging rental market were left by Steve's brother, a local real estate agent. Long messages on Christian ideals and family loyalty often coming from distant cousins who I hardly know. Dealing with family friends who have known me since my early years is the most difficult. People who grew up with me now tell me how unhappy they are with my decisions, and every call seems like another tiny betrayal. Some even claim that I'm damaging Dad's standing in the neighborhood. The problem is that this has nothing to do with cruelty or profit. This is about honoring Dad's desires and preserving the things he created. It has been agonizing enough to see them methodically destroy all traces of him. The house was his legacy. I've paid for all of their expenses, allowed them to live rent-free for years, and put up with their unapproved changes. Eventually, enough is enough. They have 2 weeks to come up with new plans. I'm refusing to give in to Mom's constant demands for more time. Mr. Anderson claims that the law is entirely on my side and that I have been more than giving. He is assisting me with creating official paperwork for the notice to vacate, ensuring that everything is accurately documented. I realize that this makes me appear to be the villain in everyone else's tale, but sometimes standing up for what's right. Here is the text with full punctuation added, maintaining the original words and meaning. _ requires making difficult choices, even when others disagree. I learned that from my dad. Third update. We appreciate everyone's help at this trying time. Things have come to an unavoidable end. Therefore, this will likely be my last update. I assigned Mom and Steve a 2-week deadline, but it's already passed. The past 2 weeks have been the longest of my life. They have been filled with guilt-tripping, continual emotional manipulation, and progressively frantic attempts to get me to change my mind. Mom did everything she could. Every day, she called, oscillating between fury and tears. She would say, "I changed your diapers one day. I gave up everything for you," she would yell the next day. Steve also changed strategies, trying to negotiate instead of using intimidation. He recommended establishing a formal lease and offered to begin paying rent. I couldn't rely on them to uphold whatever agreements we made, though, given what they had done to Dad's house. When I got to the house, there were people gathering on the front lawn. 3 days prior to the deadline, Mom had enlisted the help of friends from church, family, and even some of Dad's former business partners. They had prepared statements about moral commitments and family responsibilities as part of what amounted to an intervention. I listened to people criticize me for being a bad son for 2 hours. The topic of honoring your parents was discussed by Mom's pastor. Dad's old secretary remembered his generosity with tears in her eyes. My elementary school teacher even came to remind me of the morals my father had attempted to teach me. The hardest part was when Lisa got up and talked about how stress could hurt her unborn child while covering her pregnant abdomen with her hands, while Mom was crying next to her. A few of the church women were glaring at me. It was an expert lesson in manipulating emotions. But during this ambush, an unexpected event occurred. I had a strange sense of serenity as I sat there listening to everyone talk about Dad. People who hadn't even been to his funeral suddenly professing to know what he would have wanted. Dad used to say, "Stand your ground when you know you're right," and I could almost hear his voice in my thoughts. I got to my feet and spoke to the group. I described how Dad planned everything carefully to ensure his family's future and how he had constructed this house by hand. I showed them pictures of Steve's unapproved modifications, including the historical elements he ruined and the fine craftsmanship he removed and replaced with flimsy modern fixtures. After that, I presented them with a letter from Dad outlining his reasons for leaving everything to me. Some of the elder business associates nodded as I read his remarks about trust, accountability, and preserving his legacy. They understood because they'd known Dad. They really knew him. Shortly thereafter, the group scattered. While some looked disapproving, the righteous wrath had subsided, and others gently apologized as they walked away without saying another word. Mom and Steve returned inside. I stayed there with Mr. Anderson and a locksmith on the morning of the deadline. Although they weren't required, I had hired a security company to be on hand just in case the house was deserted. The remainder of their possessions were packed into Steve's truck. Steve couldn't help but give me a last poke, but Mom refused to look at me as he assisted Lisa into his pickup. He asked, "You're happy with yourself? Your father would be so proud of how you've treated your mother." I didn't answer. Dad would have known. I know he had prepared for this possibility. What other reason might he have had for being so explicit in his will? I strolled about the home after they had left. I had underestimated the extent of the harm. Builder-grade materials had been used to replace the original fittings Dad had painted over or taken out his handcrafted woodwork. We had spent so many weekends at the workshop, and it had changed completely. I have no intention of pursuing damages, but Mr. Anderson documented everything for any legal considerations. I simply want to put this chapter behind me and concentrate on fixing what can be fixed. Some of Dad's old craftsman friends have already been contacted, and they are eager to assist in rebuilding the features that were taken out. For now, Mom is staying with her sister. The majority of my relatives have stopped talking to me altogether. However, some sometimes call to chastise me on social media. Steve's children continue to share heartbreaking updates about their poor mother being thrown out of her home, but fewer people are responding to each post. Through it all, Emily has been my pillar of support. She reminds me of Dad's letter whenever I begin to doubt myself, expressing his faith in my ability to make the right choices. I will eventually tell Emma about her grandfather and the heritage he attempted to preserve, but she is too little to comprehend what is occurring right now. To restore the house to its original state, I'm collaborating with a restoration professional. We can preserve the spirit of what Dad made, but it won't be perfect. Some things can't be reversed. First, the workshop will be restored, the same place where I learned from my father, where I want my daughter to study. Being the villain in someone else's tale, sometimes the price of doing the right thing. I may never be able to rebuild the relationships I lost, but I can live with the fact that I preserved what my father trusted me with. As Dad used to say, integrity is about doing the right thing, even when it hurts, and not about taking the easy route. I believe he would comprehend. My last update will be this one. I appreciate everyone's support along this journey. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, Please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. After discovering my husband's autism and kitty food preference, I faced deceit and marital stress, leading to my decision to divorce. Well, it's been a lot longer than the 1 week update I promised. I could make excuses, but I won't. For those of you who don't want to read my original post, I asked for help with my husband's food preference issues, and through talking with many people on here and ultimately his mother, it was revealed that he was diagnosed with autism as a child. Some of the comments on my original post were not so kind. I got a lot of accusations that still hurt me. Some just make me angry, particularly the person who commented simply, "Please don't bully him. He's my goddamn husband, not a schoolyard friend, not a sibling, not a child. Infantilizing him doesn't help his case at all." Moving on, I was very upset as he had never mentioned anything to me. We've discussed all sorts of medical issues together, but his diagnosis never came up. I want to stress this. This isn't a matter of me not wanting to be married to an autistic man. This is a matter of my husband keeping something important from me and causing me a great deal of stress that could have been avoided if I was aware of his diagnosis. For example, I continuously pushed him to try new foods or attend concerts or visit loud amusement parks. I knew he wasn't particularly thrilled about any of those things, but they are all very normal couple activities that I wanted us to experience together. Had I been aware of his autism, I would have had a better understanding of how negatively these things affected him and made more of an effort to integrate things he liked with things I liked, maybe a smaller local band or a craft fair instead of an amusement park. Anyways, that's the backstory. Read below for the update. I confronted him about my conversation with his mother the night before our counseling appointment. I made sure to bring it up casually so I didn't become angry again. He tried to brush me off at first, saying he didn't know what I was talking about. After talking for a bit, he eventually confessed that he not only knew of the diagnosis, but deliberately kept it from me. He said I was his dream, and he didn't want to do anything to ruin our perfect relationship. I explained how him keeping this from me hurt me. I explained how I could have been there to support him instead of feeling like he needed to hide. He said he wasn't ashamed of it at all. He explained that it's just not something that affects him anymore. I again explained how it affects me, but he didn't seem to care. I didn't show him the post I made, but I used some of the advice from you all to try to explain why his autism really does, in fact, still affect his life. We went to bed upset. The next day, he acted like nothing happened. We ate breakfast, he had chicken nuggets and went about our day. I kept expecting him to bring it up, but he never did. I didn't have the nerve to bring it up again until later at the marriage counselor's office. I spoke to the counselor, so as not to seem accusing, and explained that this was an issue that bothered me. My husband actually laughed and said he assumed I'd gotten over it by now. When I explained that no, I really hadn't, he got angry with me and stormed out. The counselor tried to mediate, but it wasn't much use as my husband went to wait in the car. I was worried he'd leave without me, so I cut the meeting short. Our ride home was quiet. It wasn't until we got home that I said I was worried he was keeping other things from me, too. He said he'd been reading online about how women can't understand autism, and therefore he didn't think it was important to tell me about it. I said that was the weakest excuse I'd ever heard. He then said that I'd leave him if I knew. I said, if I left him, it would be because he's a liar. Apparently, he told all of our mutual friends that he'd just been diagnosed with autism and I was considering leaving him because of it. Now many of our friends won't talk to me and act very cold when we run into each other in public. I don't know what else he's told them, but I think he told someone I cheated on him as a fake account has been commenting horrible things about me and my supposed sexual habits on all of my Instagram posts. I keep reporting them, but then it seems like another just pops up in its place. I haven't decided if divorce is the right path. I know he's been browsing incel and other bitter male-centric websites. One of his friends is a self-described incel. So I'm even more convinced that this isn't the man I married. I'm mostly just confused. I've been avoiding him at home, and it feels like more of a roommate situation at this point. He doesn't really leave his den until it's time for work, and then he's back in the den until bed. It seems like everything is messed up just from me wanting to help. I don't even know what to expect at this point, much less how to move on from here. Edit. There are so many more comments than I anticipated. I'm trying to at least read through most of them, although I think I'm past my emotional ability to reply. I'm really shocked at how overwhelmingly supportive people are. Thank you. I'm going to be discussing divorce with a lawyer. I don't know how to bring it up with him, but I'm past the point of caring. You're all right. I dread coming home to him in the evenings. I dread if he will miraculously want to talk. This isn't healthy for either of us. At the very least, some time apart would be good. That's all for now. I don't think I'll update past this, as I'm already uncomfortable with how quickly this blew up. But I will be living elsewhere by the end of the month. Now, to the next story. Story 2. My wife will not shut up, and I'm not sure I can take it that much longer. Is it possible for that to be a reason to leave? I'm not sure if I should have posted this on 8 instead, but here goes. My wife will not shut up. I'm not talking about your usual chatty Kathy. I mean, she almost literally will not shut up. She will talk continuously from the moment she knows I'm within earshot, not just in the same room. I mean, as soon as it's reasonable to assume that I can hear her, she will not stop talking until I'm gone, and sometimes not even then. On more than one occasion, I've gone into the bathroom, turned on the loud exhaust fan, taking a leisurely dump, and then returned to hear her cheerfully engaged in the same conversation she was enjoying before I went in. She also refuses to use the exhaust fan while she's in the restroom because it would prevent her from being heard. So I get to hear all the bathroom noises on top of whatever Homeric epic about her friend's cousin's girlfriend's hairdresser she's blathering on about. I once drove from Tampa, Florida, to Chicago, Illinois, with her before we were married. I'm such an idiot. Without saying more than 10 sentences, she did not stop talking the entire way. The entire way, television onto a show I like. That's not a problem. She happily turned the volume down so it doesn't get in the way, having sex. That's the perfect time to tell me about how Olivia Newton-John still has the leather pants she wore in Greece and she, brace yourself, still fits in them. Really, needless to say, we don't go to the movies ever. I've been shushed out of too many theaters. I get it. She grew up in a huge Italian Catholic family in the Bronx. If you don't talk loud and constantly, you don't get to talk at all. I, on the other hand, grew up in a Scandinavian family with 2 children. To this day, I'm not sure we ever had a conversation in our house. I actually often wonder if that's what made me attractive to her. I was taught to politely listen to people and then wait for them to finish before replying. She never finishes or takes a breath. It sometimes seems so, to her. I'm paying rapt attention to her no matter how much she talks. That's not true, though. Another difference between people of Swedish heritage is that we don't use filler words for acknowledgement other than the moten now useful on every occasion. We're pretty much silent when we listen to others. No huh, or yeah, or oh my god needed. A nod of the head every 10 minutes or so is all you need to convey your attentiveness. I think it has a lot to do with living in the frigid north. You keep your mouth open as much as my wife does, and your teeth are going to shatter from the cold. To her, that's like being in the room with a dead person. She's always stopping to ask, "Are you even listening?" Or say, "You never pay attention to me," or even quiz me with, "What did I just say?" I've become an expert at storing the last 2-4 words she says and pairing them back at her. She'd be like, blah, 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 and then she told him she wasn't taking that kind of crap anymore, and I'll go, "That kind of crap?" As if I had any idea what kind of crap it was or who it was that wouldn't take it anymore. And she'd say, Yeah, and think I've been paying attention the whole time. I joke about it a lot, but it's actually getting to the point where it's a problem. Our son is 7 years old, and he has developed a pronounced stutter because she interrupts him constantly. Growing up in her house, if anyone paused, even for a millisecond, that was grounds for talking over them, and you talk loud, so they didn't finish. My son apparently inherited some of my less staccato speech patterns, and she basically just uses that to interrupt and take over for the conversation. I didn't know that was considered a stutter until we went to one of those parent-teacher night things, and a teacher listened to my wife and then turned to me and said, "Well, at least now I know why Josh has a stutter." Just like that. She's failed at least one job interview because of this. I know because I lined it up with a business acquaintance myself. He called me up and said sorry, but he just couldn't take being in the same room with her because she wouldn't stop talking. We rarely are invited for a second couples date. She monopolizes the conversation every time we go out with other people. Who wants more than one dose of that? You're probably wondering, well, have you told her about this? Yes, many times. Sometimes jokingly, sometimes with utter seriousness. The reactions vary from anger, talks louder, higher, faster, and uses lots more swear words to tears. She's the only person I know who can carry on a totally unrelated conversation while sobbing hysterically. The one thing that doesn't happen is her talking any less. I try not to let it get to me. She's a very affectionate woman. Loves me to death, mother of my child. Pretty as the day we met. Prettier even. We still get plenty of alone time, granted. She won't shut up while we're doing it. But I'm pretty busy, so I don't really notice as much. But it does get to me. It's selfish and shows a lack of self-awareness. There's a time and a place for enthusiastic conversation, and they're not always and everywhere. I know the answer to the problem. I have to talk back. In effect, the only thing that possibly could shut her up is for me to do the same thing as she does. I would have to interrupt at the slightest pause. I would have to talk louder, yelling if necessary. When she tries to interrupt me, I would have to learn to use Italian hand gestures to emphasize my points and chop off her objections. But I'm not Italian. I'm a waspy pale dude who grew up in a household that would have made a mortuary sound like a middle school cafeteria. 12 years of this has finally pushed me to the brink. I'm not sure I can take it that much longer. I'm just not sure if I could get a word in to tell the judge why I'm there in his divorce court. My wife wouldn't let me. TL, doctor, wife will not shut up. Is that reasonable grounds for leaving her? Underscore. Edit. Obligatory Reddit. Oh my god. I had no idea this would blow up. Which is true. I thought maybe a couple of people would just call me an asterisk hole, and that would be it. But rip inbox. It was nice to know you. So, in the interest of not replying to every comment, I will try to address some of the common ones and answer some of the questions I saw popping up multiple times. Also, thanks for the often hilarious advice. Q1. Is this BS? A1. No, it's all mostly true. I admit to some embellishment for dramatic comedic effect, though the bit about the leather pants is representative. Not an actual quote, not from Sexy Times anyway. She probably mentioned it at some point, though. Q2. Why didn't you run away screaming before you got married? Sub-question. Was OP's wife hot? A2. Yes, she is hot and funny and vivacious. Also, I really was a Nordic silent bear. Thanks, you, sir or Dragonfire. My wife drew me out of my shell, and if I'm brutally honest with myself, when you're young and getting laid on the regular, a lot of things don't seem all that terrible. Damn you, penis, this is all your fault. Q3. Did your kid really develop a stutter because of this? A3. Medically speaking, I cannot state this with 100% certainty. The cause was never formally diagnosed. However, I watched it happen firsthand. I'm not a qualified speech therapist, but I think it was a reasonable conclusion to draw based on the observations I made. I'd welcome a dissenting opinion from an actual professional, though, if only to salve my conscience. Which leads to Q4. Aren't you really the one responsible for your kid's stutter? After all, you did nothing to stop it. A4. Guilty. And I feel utterly like S***T about it all the time. For the record, I did bring it up lots of times, even to the point of getting into arguments about it and speaking harshly to my wife when she interrupted my son. But I think by the time I realized it was happening, most of the damage was done, and anything I could do was more expressing my anger about it than actually making an effective change. All the rest of this weirdly long post is just ranting. If there's an actual justification for leaving, this is it. And I'm deathly afraid that she get full custody and just make it worse, or even irreparable. Q5. Is it because she's pi, OCD, insecure, autistic, mentally ill? A 5. I don't think so, although I've always sensed an overwhelming need for attention. But I know her well enough that even mentioning it would shatter her. It's bizarre. Sorry that I can't bring myself to do a lot of things people have suggested, and believe me, I've probably thought of all of them because they just seem too cruel to me. And yet, I'm seriously considering divorce. I realize the contradiction there. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.